Okay, it's 12:45. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the Commission on Chicago Landmarks, our regular meeting, Thursday, July 7th. I'd like to do the roll call. As I do that, if you could indicate that you can hear and see me. Vice Chair Commissioner Jekowitz.
Here, and I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Commissioner Burns.
Here, I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Commissioner Hughes.
Present, I can hear and see you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ponce.
I'm here. I can see and hear you.
And today I understand that we are missing Commissioner Tolliver as well as Commissioner Cox. Before we get started, I'd like to take a minute for just a moment of silence in respect to the tragedy that occurred this last weekend. Unfortunately, these tragedies are happening throughout all of our communities throughout the city of Chicago on a regular basis, unfortunately. But I would just like to take a moment of silence. Thank you. In 2020, Governor Pritzker signed Public Act 101-0640, making certain amendments to the Open Meetings Act so that we, along with other boards and commissions, can continue to host virtual meetings during the COVID-19 public health emergency, provided that certain conditions are met. One of those conditions is that I, as head of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks, determined that an in-person meeting of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks and its Permanent Review Committee are not practical or prudent. I want to make sure that our virtual meeting meets all the conditions of the Open Meetings Act as amended. Therefore, I'm making a determination pursuant to Section 7E2 of the Open Meetings Act that an in-person meeting of this Commission on Chicago Landmarks and its Permanent Review Committee is not practical or prudent. Similarly, I'm also making a determination pursuant to Section 7E5 that because of the disasters declared by the governor, it is unfeasible for at least one member of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks or its chief administrative officer or its chief legal officer to be physically present at the meeting place for either meeting. Pursuant to a resolution adopted by the Commission on Chicago Landmarks on June 4th, 2020, regarding the chairman's emergency rulemaking powers, I issued emergency rules governing the conduct of remote public meetings, commission meetings, and provisions for remote public participation effective February 18th, 2022. These rules are posted on the Commission's website. In line with these emergency rules, today's regular Commission meeting is a virtual meeting being simulcast to the general public via live streaming. Commission meetings have been held virtually since May of 2020. Meetings are structured to minimize chances for technical difficulties. Members of the general public have been encouraged to submit written statements in advance of the meeting, and these have been posted on the Commission's website and are available for viewing during the virtual meeting at www.chicago.gov/CCL. Further emergency rules, verbal statements by the general public for all agenda items will take place at the beginning of the meeting, so all those wishing to speak at today's meeting should be signed in to the Zoom meeting at this time. Before we hear staff presentations in the agenda items and ask to hear from owners or applicants and their teams, we will open the floor up to members of the general public who wish to make comment about the items to be heard on today's agenda. Members of the public wishing to comment should use raise hand function of Zoom to indicate that they wish to speak. Members of the public not using a smartphone or computer and instead phoning into the meeting should press *9 to activate the raise hand function and do the same to deactivate it. I, or the meeting facilitator, will call out the names one by one and unmute those people. Once unmuted, speakers should give their full name and organization, if any, they represent. Each speaker is allocated 3 minutes to speak. Once all members of the public wishing to make a comment have been given an opportunity to do so, we'll go through the agenda. I would ask that owners and applicants and the representatives, as well as aldermen, wait to speak until after the staff presentations have been made on their agenda item. One housekeeping rule, I forgot to indicate that I also am present and we do have a quorum. Okay, so are there members of the general public who would like to make comments about agenda item 2, the preliminary landmark recommendation for the Epworth Church building at 5253 North Kenmore?
Chairman, we have several hands raised, and the top of the list is Zurich Esposito.
Okay, Mr. Esposito, glad to see you, and you have the floor. Zurich, are you there?
I apologize. I'm here.
Thank you.
I'm Zurich Esposito, 2947 West Wilson Avenue, Chicago. I am the former executive director of AIA Chicago and past vice president of programs and of development at the Chicago Architecture Foundation. I have a master's degree in historic preservation from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where my master's thesis was on the work of the Chicago-based architecture firms Thielbar and Fugard and Knapp, whose collective significant projects, such as the McGraw-Hill Building, the Moody Bible Institute, the Trustee System Service Building, 3 of the apartments on East Lakeshore Drive, as well as the 1930 addition on Epworth Church, which is included in the proposed landmark designation, all continue to serve and grace Chicago communities. The Epworth Building's addition by Thielbar and Fugard is an important aspect of the building's second design phase, a period when the church congregation was expanding. I would like to fully support my enthusiasm for the preliminary landmark designation on Epworth Church, and I hope the community and the commission are supportive of it as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zurich. Next.
Next, we have Mr. Ward Miller.
Thank you.
Can you hear me clearly, Mr. Chairman?
We sure can, Ward.
All right. Good evening, Chairman, or good afternoon, Chairman Wong and members of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. I'm Ward Miller, Executive Director of Preservation Chicago. We are here before you today in support of a Chicago landmark designation for the Epworth United Methodist Church in Chicago's Edgewater community. This church was designed by architect and parishioner Frederick B. Thompson in 1890, with later additions to the complex by John Fugard of Thielbar and Fugard. Both Townsend and Fugard are noteworthy architects and each have a number of buildings designed by them and recognized as designated Chicago landmarks. Epworth Church is special in many ways. Its building and its history is so much aligned with the beginnings of the Edgewater community. Its land was donated to the church by John Cochran, recognized as a father of Edgewater, and a gift to the congregation and community. For over 130 years, it has been a cornerstone of Edgewater and is recognized locally as a building of great significance and one of the oldest such structures with this tremendous legacy. For many of us, it's been a landmark in waiting, if you will, for many years. My personal experience with Epworth Church dates to 1990, when Inspired Partnerships hired the Office of John Vinci and Wiss Jenny Elsner to do a historic structures report of 25 churches across Chicago. Many, if not all, still stand today. And we can't help but feel that part of those efforts 30 years ago helped to ensure their preservation. The houses of worship that were part of the team effort left a great impression on the team. And through the years, Epworth has always stood out as a stellar and rare building type found in our city. Over the past few years, we at Preservation Chicago have been working with the Edgewater Historical Society and both members and former members of Epworth Church, along with Alderman Osterman, his office, and the Department of Planning and Development Historic Preservation staff to encourage preservation of this house of worship, and noting perhaps an uncertain future for this orange rated building complex. It's been a very long road, and we have found ourselves outreaching and protecting many features of the exterior of these buildings, including the art glass windows from being sold and removed from the site. This included a seminal window by the firm of Healy and Millay, which was offered for sale. But despite these outreaches and these efforts, 3 separate quatrefoil windows were removed, which Preservation Chicago has tracked down in St. Louis, Missouri, and we hope to have them restored into the building as part of the landmark designation. We are grateful to so many, including Alderman Osterman, members of the community, Matt Crawford, and a whole host of individuals associated with the Edgewater Historical Society, and we enthusiastically support this Chicago landmark recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Next.
Next, we have Kathy Gemperl.
Yes, my name is Kathy Gemperly. I'm the founding president of the Edgewater Historical Society. And I'm here to support the designation of Epworth Church at Berwyn and Kenmore as a Chicago landmark.
Kathy,
Yes,
do you have both your phone and
my computer on, yeah.
Yeah, one of them has to get turned off because you're echoing quite.
Okay. I'll see if I can do that. Why don't you go on to someone else and I'll be back.
Okay, can we go to the next person?
Next person is Bruce Green.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Bruce Green. I was a member of Epworth for nearly 2 decades. From 2003 until 2019, I served as president of the Board of Trustees and as the church historian. I'm in favor of landmark status being conferred upon Epworth Church building. As of July 6, a petition circulated by Friends of Epworth Church through change.org has collected 991 signatures from the community members in favor of landmarking the building. Epworth Church has always been about community. It was built approximately at the midway point between Chicago Methodist Temple and First Methodist Church of Evanston. Both noted churches gave grants and then loans to finance Epworth's construction. It is the largest Methodist edifice along Chicago's North Lake Shore. There are Masonic symbols found on the building's exterior and throughout its interior, many of which have been obscured by time to the untrained eye. By the 1920s, Epworth had outgrown its facility. They renovated and expanded the physical plant to over 40,000 square feet. This enlarged sanctuary to a seating capacity of 650 people. The sympathetic community house addition included classrooms, social halls, and a full court gymnasium to benefit the health and well-being of church members and the surrounding community alike. This renovation also included a new pipe organ, which was built by MP Moeller Organ Company as their opus number 5881. It was a memorial gift by noted author, celebrated organ architect, and former Epworth organist, Dr. William H. Barnes. Of the over 400 organs Dr. Barnes designed in his lifetime, the Barnes Memorial Organ is one of 8 in the metropolitan area. And of those 8, only 3 are in unaltered states. This instrument is one of those 3. A men's homeless shelter was created in 1983 when a man died of exposure on the front steps and is still in operation. In 1986, a tutoring program was started to help the local students at Gowdy Elementary School. This program in part facilitated the school to rise from being one of the top worst performing schools in the country to an IB school a decade ago. Chicago Women's AIDS Project also called Epworth home for nearly 30 years. In 2005, the Oregon Historical Society bestowed Historical Instrument Certificate number 328. The local chapter of the OHS has had multiple recitals and concerts at Epworth highlighting the instrument. I boldly ask the commission to include this treasured Chicago instrument as part of the landmark status so that the instrument can be enjoyed by the community for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Can we try to go back to Kathy Gemperl?
Okay, I think I fixed the problem.
You sure did.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Epworth Methodist First Church was founded in 1889 by a group of neighbors in Edgewater and Argyle Park under the leadership of Mr. and Mrs. L.T. Slocum, who held the founding meeting in their home on Kenmore. The church was designed by architect Fred Townsend, who would not charge for his services. The lot was given to the church by J.L. Cochran, who had given the name of Edgewater to the area. A $1,000 gift towards the project was given by Senator William Gowdy, who lived nearby and was Mrs. Slocum's father. The structure was built with granite stones, transported to the site from Wisconsin, and offloaded at Berwyn Avenue and the lake. From the beginning, this was a remarkable building. Mrs. Slocum became active in the North End Women's Club founded in Edgewater and was its president when the club became actively supporting women's suffrage in 1900. The church likewise became active in the community, and in the 20s, the need for more space pushed for the plan to extend the building on the site. The architectural firm of Thiebert and Fugger completed the extensive expansion, and it opened on February 22nd, 1930. The cost of this addition was over $100,000, and the church had to take out a mortgage, which was not retired until 1948. The expanded space allowed the congregation to reach out to community in many more ways. In the 1950s, the membership of the congregation dwindled and it became more difficult to manage the property. One of Edgewater's living treasures, Beth Palmer, began a tutoring program for children in the neighborhood. A homeless shelter found several different sleeping quarters as a different use for the gym. Artists found space for studios and presentations of exhibits. In 2002, the administration allowed the building to be put on the National Register of Historic Places. In 2004, the Edgewater Historical Society hosted a tour of the church to show the important historical structure as part of our mission to educate the residents of Edgewater about the value of the building. In 2020, the Edgewater Historical Society sought the review of the Landmarks Commission for this landmarking designation. Many residents signed petitions to support landmarking. The community has shown that it wants this church designated as a Chicago landmark. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gemperl. Next.
Next, we have Ms. Lisa Di Chiara.
Okay, Lisa.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Lisa Di Quiera, Director of Advocacy for Landmarks, Illinois. And as you've already heard from the comments of Kathy, Bruce, and Ward, and Zurich, this is a really important building architecturally. It already is an iconic building within the Edgewater neighborhood, let alone the city at large, and also has already functioned in many ways as a local landmark for the community, not only again because of its important design and later expansion to accommodate that community, but because of the many, many important programs and services and things that have been part of the role of this church in the Edgewater community. Landmarks Illinois included the Epworth Church in 1991 in our annual neighborhood church tour that year, which happened to be for the Uptown Edgewater neighborhood. And it was one of 6 churches that we visited that year to really, again, highlight its incredible importance. And I want to thank not only Alderman Osterman for supporting this landmark designation effort, but obviously the incredible work of the Edgewater Historical Society and Preservation Chicago and local citizens who have really been for several years now pushing the need to protect this really important landmark. We fully support. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa.
Next, we have Carla Bruni.
Hello, my name is Carla Bruni. I'm an independent preservation consultant. I also work with the Chicago Bungalow Association, and I'm an Edgewater resident. I was a graduate student in 2007 looking for a building to practice architectural writing on for a class. And I remember riding my bike past Epworth and literally stopping and starting to laugh because it was so obviously the most interesting building I would ever see. So I started working on it. I became obsessed with it. I worked a lot with Bruce Green and ended up doing a complete National Register nomination. I remember coming before this council really, really nervous and extremely overprepared because I was so afraid of letting this building down because it was so remarkable. It's set back from both Kenmore and Berwyn Avenues and allows for these grassy parkways in an area that is mostly sidewalks and pavement. It's this oasis. It's like a breath of air. The general area surrounding it is dense. Parking is pretty much impossible. A half a block down is a residential tower with somewhere around 30 stories. And Epworth is just this really striking pause. It feels like you're stumbling into a fairy tale because it's this like earthy, hunky edifice with towers that are close enough to the ground that they feel accessible to the onlookers. It's made of giant round boulders that aren't from here, so you never expect to see them here. They were floated down from Wisconsin to a slip they made out on Berwyn Avenue because someone in the congregation had a connection. Other materials like the Joliet limestone that adorns the building also have excellent integrity, and it's remarkably intact for being as old as it is. When the cornerstone was laid in 1890, this part of Edgewater was still referred to as a wild woods in a forest primeval with not a house anywhere in sight. Edgewater itself was only 4 years old when Epworth was completed. Epworth is this tiny giant because it had a tiny budget and some seriously motivated and optimistic church founders. It's this really unique brand of Richardsonian Romanesque, which is already rare in Chicago, but the congregation didn't exactly have the deep pockets of the Glessner House to work with. So like with most things, the most interesting, unique creations come from creative humans with big dreams and limited resources. Necessity is the mother of invention. So if the criteria is to have a truly unique building in Chicago, a one-of-a-kind building, I mean, this is literally it. This cannot ever be replicated. I mean, I'm pretty sure nobody else was floating boulders down from this particular region of Wisconsin to build anything else then or since then. So please protect this resource. Nobody wants it gone who actually lives anywhere near it. I can tell you that very certainly. Everyone I've spoken with about it is shocked and frustrated, and we're wondering what it's going to be replaced with. It's not going to be replaced with anything remarkable or unreplicable, nothing like what it is now, and nothing for the community that actually lives there. So thank you for listening and for having this meeting today. I am very much in favor of landmark designation.
Thank you, Ms. Bruni.
Our last speaker is Nuria Sheehan.
Hi, thank you. Nuria Sheehan, 5250 North Kenmore Avenue. I've lived directly across the street from Epworth Church for over 8 years, and I'm here to support the designation of the church as a historic landmark. As a neighbor here, it feels inconceivable, really, that such a unique and stunning building could be torn down. It's been an important part of the community for a long time before I have been here or any of us have been here. But now, especially since early in the pandemic, people have really taken to using those spaces that Carla was talking about, the steps, the green space, as a place to be alone or come together, play music, turn on some speakers. And this neighborhood where we live, it's a place where people really take care of each other, which includes the housing that some people have mentioned in the extension of the church, where I believe somewhere around 25 unhoused men have a shelter. So right now, currently, the neighborhood is losing several older kind of human-scaled buildings, and they're putting up boxy, monolithic apartments with overpriced housing. Just a block away, a zoning variance was granted last year, allowing a 5-story building to be built right up to the lot line. As neighbors here, we're already dealing with a horrendous amount of construction. There's the massive red line project going on, and it'll be getting worse sometime later this year, I believe, with the demolition and the new construction of the apartment going in just about a block away. So yeah, I just want to say, if we lose this building, all of us who live here will just have to get another bleak rectangle to look at instead of a church that's been such a place of just care and community for over 100 years. So thank you for considering this landmark, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Sheehan.
Chairman, we had one more hand raised. Arathi Gowda.
Okay.
Hello, and a quick question. This is Arathi Gowda. This is actually a statement of support for a Century and Consumers building. So I'm Arti Gowda, principal at ZGF Architects in their project performance team.
I will
and
take
current
your
vice president
comments.
for advocacy
Ms.
for the
Gowda?
American Institute of
Ms.
Architecture.
Ms. Gowda, I will take your comments when we get to that section for the Century.
Sorry, I think I got
consumers.
muted midstream.
Okay. We'll take your comments at the appropriate time. Is there anybody further?
We have one more hand raised, Bob Remmer.
Okay. And this is for the Epworth Church building?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Remmer, please go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Bob Reamer. I'm the president emeritus of the Edgewater Historical Society and the immediate past president. Epworth Church is a long revered historic building in Edgewater, as you've been hearing. It's our oldest extant church building with unique construction and history recognized in 2008 by the National Historic Registry, thanks to the incredible work and research done by Edgewater's own Carla Bruni, as you've heard. The church's history has long been chronicled, cherished, and updated by Bruce Green, who you also heard from, who was previously the church's historian and its forever advocate. Both provided huge impetus to this effort. The Historical Society became concerned about the future of this orange-rated church several years ago when the Upworth congregation numbers were dwindling and after a fire destroyed the adjacent parish house. 2 years ago, as you heard from Kathy, our board unanimously requested the city to designate the church a landmark. And since then, our worst fears came true. But today we look with hopeful and grateful anticipation that the commission will landmark this complex. We are, however, deeply, deeply concerned that in recent months, the building has been brutally dismantled of many important interior architectural details and some external facing stained glass windows integral to its potential landmark status and thus protected. And you've heard some of the possible options we have on that, but they haven't come through from what Ward Miller stated. In short, it's been nothing less than brutal. And we implore the commission to hold the owners to account and restore as many important elements as possible. The ownership had to have known what they were doing was wrong and improper. Accountability must be sought. Special thanks to Ward Miller from Preservation Chicago, who fiercely worked with and advised the community. Landmarks Illinois also furnished important support, and we're grateful and cognizant of the essential support of Alderman Osterman. And we thank those thousands of local residents who signed online and in-person petitions, who have called or written on behalf of Epworth. And helping organize this effort have been stars such as Ann Sullivan, Killian Walsh, and many others. And I'd like to also thank Leroy Blumert and Tom Green, the co-chairs of our Historic Sites Committee. And finally, to the commission and your outstanding staff for all the professional effort you have put behind this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Remmer. Is there anybody else? Yes.
That's all we have, Chairman.
Okay. Next, are there members of the general public who would like to comment on the third agenda item, the Citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund application of the KAM is Isaiah Israel Temple at 1100 East Hyde Park Boulevard?
I see no hands raised. Ward Miller.
Mr. Miller, go ahead.
Are you hearing me clearly, Mr. Chairman?
We sure are.
Okay, for the record, Ward Miller, Executive Director of Preservation Chicago. We very much support the Adopt a Landmark funds for KAM Isaiah Israel Synagogue in Hyde Park. This is a remarkable structure and house of worship by Alfred Alschuler. It is currently undergoing a massive renovation and restoration of the building. It is one of the city's oldest synagogues, tracing its roots back to the earliest days of Chicago, and a remarkable structure, part of the Hyde Park community. And we've been partners, if you will, to some extent with this renovation project, with the congregation over time, especially with our board member, Jack Spicer, and his wife, Deborah, as well. This is really a wonderful commitment by the city of Chicago to our esteemed landmarks. And we very much support this $250,000 Adopt a Landmark monies and grant to KAM Isaiah Israel Synagogue in Hyde Park. Truly one of Chicago's great synagogues and one of Chicago's great landmarks. It's also a house of worship. So thank you. And we also want to support the Adopt a Landmark monies to Second Presbyterian Church on South Michigan Avenue. Also a very remarkable building that has withstood the test of time and is so much a part of the city's downtown area and the historic district that encompasses next to Motor Row and the Prairie Avenue Historic District, including the Glessner House. And these are two remarkable houses of worship that we feel are very worthy of this grant designation. And we are grateful and supportive at Preservation Chicago for these monies dedicated to these two seminal religious buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, and thank you for being efficient with your time. For the record, if you could also make note that Mr. Miller was supporting the Second Presbyterian Church Adopt a Landmark Fund. Is there anybody else signed up to speak for the KAM Isaiah Israel Temple?
We have Miss Lisa Quiera.
Ms. Quiera, please.
Hello again, Chairman Wong and Commissioners. This is Lisa Quiera, again, Director of Advocacy, Landmarks, Illinois. I just want to echo what Ward said. Not only are these two really important architecturally historic places of worship, but again, we are so thankful to the city for this Adopt a Landmark program. It is a game changer. It is an extremely important fund, not only for places of worship, but for so many other buildings throughout the city of Chicago. And I'm just so proud of the city for having this fund available for designated landmarks. And I really, again, want to just make that clear so that our city council will continue to support this important fund. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Anybody else for KAM Isaiah Israel?
I don't see any other hands raised, Chairman.
Okay, let's go on to the next item is if there are folks in the general public who would like to comment on the fourth agenda item, the Citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund for the Second Presbyterian Church at 1936 South Michigan Avenue. I know Mr. Miller has already spoken.
We have Mr. William Tyre.
Okay.
Hello, this is William Tyre. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Wong and the commissioners. My name is William Tyre. I'm the Executive Director and Curator at the Glessner House, the recipient of an Adopt a Landmark grant earlier this year. I am also a member of Second Presbyterian Church and a board member of Friends of Historic Second Church, which is a separate nonprofit that undertakes significant restoration projects at the church. I did want to point out the significance of the building, which is the only church in the city of Chicago that is designated a national historic landmark for its significant arts and crafts interior. I have to say that during my 10 years with the church, I have been very impressed with both the church and the Friends organization in how seriously they have taken the significance of the building and the projects related to it. And the other thing that I would like to say, which specifically relates to the Adopt a Landmark grant that is being considered for the church itself, is that they have also been excellent stewards in terms of remaining a vital community resource. So in addition to the building providing what it does for the congregation and being open on a regular basis for tourists from around the world to visit, they have made the significant amount of space within the building available for everything from a lunch bag program to housing the rehearsals for the South Loop Orchestra. So the church is very committed to remaining an important resource in the community and beyond. I have seen firsthand the work that is going on right now, which is geared towards renovating a lot of those spaces to make them much more usable for both the church and outside organizations. So I cannot strongly enough encourage the approval of the Adopt a Landmark grant, because the work they are doing there is very important. The building is incredibly important, and we're excited to be able to move forward with this next phase of work. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Tyre. Is there anybody else?
Next, we have Mr. David Neff.
My name is David Neff.
Mr. Neff, do you have your phone and your computer on? Because you're echoing like crazy.
Go ahead to the next person.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman, I don't see any other hands raised. I don't know, Ms. Aarti Gowda was going to speak on some project. I don't know which one was that.
She was going to speak on the Century and Consumers Building that's coming up after the next item. Let's see if Mr. Neff has been able to fix this problem.
Mr. Neff, you just have to log out of one device. You're on two devices. And you're part of the team to speak on agenda item 4.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
My name is David Neff. I've been the senior pastor here at the church for 11 years. Second Presbyterian Church has been the cornerstone of the South Loop neighborhood since our historic building was completed in 1874. The church building has not gone through a major revision since a fire necessitated the rebuilding of the church sanctuary in 1901. Here at the church, our mission is to create a sense of community for our neighbors in the South Loop and South Side and City of Chicago. Over 80% of the people who use the church are not worshipers or churchgoers, but neighbors who use this building as a community center and a launching place to create other circles of care, especially for those in need and the most vulnerable. We appreciate the consideration of funds by the Landmark Commission, and we anticipate continuing to bless our neighbors and our community for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neff. Okay. And that is it for Second Press?
No other hands raised.
Okay. Are there members of the general public who'd like to comment on the fifth agenda item, the program committee report regarding nominations to the National Register of Historic Places for the Cornelia at 3500 North Lakeshore Drive, the Chicago Vocational School at 2100 East 87th Street, Motor Row, additional information for the district located at 2200 to 2300 and 2400 blocks of South Michigan Avenue, including portions of the adjacent blocks of Wabash and Indiana Avenues between Cermak and the Stevenson Expressway, and the James E. Plew building at 2635 to 2645 South Wabash Avenue. Are there anybody signed up to speak on this item?
No hands raised, Chairman.
No hands raised. We'll go on to the next one. Are there members of the general public who'd like to comment on the 6th agenda item, the informational presentation on the Century and Consumers Building at 202 and 220 South State Street?
Chairman, we have Ms. R.T. Gowda.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Wong and the Chicago Landmarks Commission team. Glad to speak during the right time slot this time. I'm Arthi Gowda, a principal at CGF Architects and their project performance team, and the current vice president for advocacy for the American Institute of Architects Chicago chapter. I, along with fellow board member Peter Vadovich, have joined today to submit the following statement of support for the preservation of the Century and Consumers Building to all of you. This is on behalf of AIA Chicago and AIA Illinois membership, 2 chapters of the American Institute of Architects. AIA Chicago and AIA Illinois' mission is to build on our shared architectural legacy by advocating for the architecture profession and partnering with communities. We join our voices with many notable architects and organizations like Preservation Chicago and Landmarks Illinois to advocate for the preservation of the Century Building, built in 1915 by Hollibird and Ruch at 202 South State Street, and the Consumers Building, built in 1913 by Jenny Mundy and Jensen at 220 South State Street. These buildings represent significant contributions to the Chicago School of Architecture by respected firms. And we stand with the communities calling for adaptive reuse and revitalization of both high rises in lieu of their demolition. While design concerns for the federal complex are valid, we strongly believe that a design team will be able to address them during the revitalization process while still respecting the existing urban fabric of the State Street corridor. These 2 early 20th century towers are elegant examples of the Chicago School of Architecture. Rich ornamentation and striking verticality of the Century Building stand in dynamic contrast to the glass and steel Dirksen Federal Building and the adjacent all-glass skyscrapers. The terracotta-clad Consumers Building features iconic 3-part Chicago-style windows and strong tripartite facades fronting State Street and Quincy. These towers help anchor the State Street corridor and provide a real-world reminder that Chicago is the birthplace of the skyscraper. Their demolition would leave a hole in the State Street urban fabric that would harm pedestrian flows and the imageability of an important commercial corridor. The preservation of our buildings is also vital to a sustainable future for all Chicagoans. This summer, as we focus on Chicago's newly adaptive climate action plan, the Mayor's Decarbonization Task Force advised us to prioritize adaptive reuse. Buildings account for approximately 40% of carbon emissions globally, and some estimates say as much as 50% when including upstream construction emissions. As Chicagoans, it's our strong belief we should not ignore our architectural legacy. Instead, we should harness the talents of our design community to resolve any concerns while preserving the richness of our urban fabric. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gowda.
Next, we have Mr. Ward Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wong and members of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. I'm Ward Miller, Executive Director of the nonprofit organization Preservation Chicago. We are before you today to encourage protections, along with your consideration of a suggestion for a preliminary landmark recommendation for the Century and Consumers Building located at 202 and 220 South State Street on the corners of State and Adams and State and Quincy Court in the heart of the Chicago Loop. You have before you several documents submitted as part of the record, including letters to officials and a change.org petition started by us at Preservation Chicago with over 22,750 petition signatures from people across our city, our state, and nation asking for preservation, protection, and landmarking of these 2 historic skyscraper structures. These remarkable early skyscraper buildings were designed by 2 of Chicago's most esteemed architectural firms of the Chicago School of Architecture, which are well recognized, honored, known, and published for their commissions around the world. The Century Building was designed by Halliburton and Roche, and the Consumers Building by Jenny Mundy and Jensen. These structures represent the last tall early skyscraper buildings and the culmination of this groundbreaking period of architecture, also known as the Chicago commercial style, prior to World War I. However, their design, considered modern in their time, embodies principles that impacted architects around the globe, from Ludwig Mies van der Rohe to the superstructures designed today. The current owner, the GSA, or Government Services Administration, currently owns these structures, and despite promises long ago to restore and revision them for federal offices, they have allowed these buildings to languish and fall into disrepair over 17 years. Recently, there's been a $52 million congressional earmark to demolish them, despite being part of the New Loop National Register District, a critical part of the State Street street wall. There is much to lose if they are demolished, including our nomination of 9 early Chicago skyscrapers as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We will be disqualified from that honor if these are demolished. We have a plan to reuse these 2 structures as an archive center, to be known as the Chicago Collaborative Archive Center, in which windows facing the Federal Center could be blocked and sealed, as archives are light sensitive. To date, we have the interest of many religious organizations, and we are very much interested in seeing these buildings preserved and landmarked, and perhaps a tolling agreement could start this conversation with a preliminary landmark designation, as been done previously with the New York Life building, now the Hotel Gray, a very successful project. We implore our city and this commission to help save and protect the Century and Consumers Building. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Next, we have Travis Root.
Hello. Thank you, Chairman Wong and everyone else. My name is Travis Root. I am just a lowly freelance graphic designer here in Chicago. I live at 640 West Briar Place. But I've had the honor of volunteering with Preservation Chicago for the last couple months, working on accumulating a bunch of signatures to save and restore the Century and Consumers Buildings. As Ward said, we're up to 22,753, which I think is nothing to sneeze at. I've heard some people say or write that these are not particularly unique buildings, but I think that's extremely incorrect. I should know because I walk by about 3 times a week on my way to the library. And ever since, even before I knew they were slated for demolition, they always caught my eye because of how tall and thin they stand. They're blade-like in their shape, especially the Century Building. It's powerful, it's confident, it has these gravity-defying proportions. They're sort of like playing cards or books standing on their edges. And before seeing the Century Building in particular, I didn't even know that that was physically possible for engineers in the early 1900s to do. It was a quality that a lot of Chicago's early skyscrapers had, but from what I've found out from my research, almost all of them have been blocked in on one or both sides, which creates sort of this like monolithic entire block uniformity in its height. But the Century and Consumers Buildings do not have any blocking in on either side, so they stand completely under their own power, and it is extremely rare in the Loop. And I think it's in a way sort of a time capsule on how the Loop used to look, these extremely tall, very thin blades just existing under their own structural power. And I think that's sort of the essence of historical preservation, right? Is to exist as a sort of time capsule where you can walk down the street and experience how the Loop used to be in the early 1900s, which I think is really cool. And I also think that the essence of Chicago's architectural legacy in the nation and worldwide is structural. I mean, terracotta, of course, is famous. The bay window is really famous, but structural engineering is really Chicago's main innovation. And I think the Century and Consumers Buildings are a perfect example of the power of early Chicago skyscraper structural innovation. And you know, they're mostly gone. And there's some other buildings that are somewhat similar, but none to this degree of visual and aesthetic beauty. I think it's a huge part of Chicago's lasting influence and our worldwide fame for architecture. I think these are the last of a rare breed, and I don't think we can let them go extinct so easily. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Root.
Our next speaker is Malachi McCarthy.
Thank you very much. My name is Malachi McCarthy. I am the archivist of the Clutian Missionaries at the corner of Monroe and Wells, and I'm also representing the archival resources for Catholic collections. We are a supporter of the preservation of these two extraordinary buildings. I think the reason why we are looking at putting them downtown, having a collaborative archive center created downtown, it would provide a central space for scholars to come. The interesting thing about the two buildings is they are located in a very academic section of the city. They're a block away from the Chicago Public Library and the DePaul downtown campus. And we could also be paired with the other universities that are downtown, such as University of Chicago, Loyola, and Notre Dame. The importance of a collaborative archive center is that with the downsizing of many churches, and especially within the Catholic community of religious communities, there is a need to provide a central space where religious archives can be kept. And this would provide a great resource, not only for the communities that are facing completion, but also for scholars coming into the city. As you probably know, that Chicago is one of the most studied cities in the United States, and these collections really provide a window into the social history, because all churches, not only Catholic churches, ministered to the poor and those who had no voice. So we really enthusiastically support the landmark designation for these buildings, and hope that you would agree with us that combining an archive project with a historic preservation project will satisfy a lot of audiences. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy.
Next, we have Ms. Lisa Quiera.
Good afternoon again, commissioners. This is Lisa Quiera, Director of Advocacy for Landmarks, Illinois. Chairman Wong and commissioners, thank you for your willingness to discuss the future of the Century and Consumers buildings on your agenda today. And after your discussion, we urge the commission to request the historic preservation staff of DPD to prepare a preliminary landmark designation report for these irreplaceable buildings. This is especially important in order to send a very strong message of opposition to demolition from the city to the federal government prior to the General Services Administration's initiation of a Section 106 process, which is anticipated later this summer, as you may have seen in the letter submitted by Regina Nally representing the GSA. Landmarks Illinois included these highly visible early 20th century commercial buildings on our 2022 most endangered historic places in Illinois list because they face demolition by the federal government, and previous redevelopment plans were halted due to security concerns by the adjacent federal courts, and demolition will leave a hole in the downtown State Street corridor, not seen on such a scale since that of Block 37. However, in this case, that hole will remain indefinitely due to the ownership of the federal government. We noted that the directive given to the General Services Administration by the federal courts was deeply flawed in asserting that the historic buildings needed to be demolished to assure their safety, when other privately owned buildings of equal or closer distance surround the federal courthouse. The appropriation of $53 million for the demolition of the buildings would be a misuse of public taxpayer funds when private funds are available to finance a rehabilitation and reuse of the buildings, while also adequately addressing the court's security concerns through design in coordination with GSA and Homeland Security. Dozens of federal courthouses exist in dense urban centers throughout the nation where security measures have been adequately addressed due to the GSA's experience as a leader in federal preservation and as an innovator in areas of security design and planning. Landmarks Illinois thanks Commissioner Cox and the Historic Preservation staff for including the buildings on today's agenda for discussion. We also want to thank Alderman Riley for recognizing their significance and his opposition to their demolition, as he expressed in his April 19th letter to Senators Durbin and Duckworth. We also provided a letter dated March 31st, co-signed with Preservation Chicago and the National Trust for Historic Preservation, to Robin Carnahan, the administrator of the GSA. And also recently, there has been a letter from the business organizations of the Loop, also in opposition to the demolition. Thank you for your attention to this urgent matter.
Thank you, Ms. Chiara. Next.
Next we have Adam Nathanson Preservation.
Hello, Chairman. Are you able to hear me?
We sure can.
Hello, Chairman and members of the Commission. My name is Adam Nathanson. I'm the Director of Operations for Preservation Chicago, and it is always an honor to address the Commission on Chicago landmarks. Preservation Chicago strongly encourages the protection and adaptive reuse of the Century and Consumers buildings and their potential designation as Chicago landmarks. They were Preservation Chicago's 7 most endangered in 2011, 2013, and again in 2022, along with Landmarks Illinois. The advocacy effort to save them has been long and complex, and their fate hangs in the balance and will soon be determined. Bravo to this commission for your attention to the Century and Consumers buildings. We so appreciate it. These early Chicago skyscrapers are highly endangered today due to the faulty logic of the General Services Administration and the $52 million earmark for their demolition. However, there is a viable win-win alternative that would accommodate all stakeholder requirements. The GSA's justification to demolish the buildings from 2018 is no longer relevant today in 2022. Their rationale was as follows: a residential adaptive reuse requires rear windows, and that rear windows present an unacceptable security risk to the courthouse. As a residential conversion is the only possible reuse, demolition therefore is necessary. Residential is the most obvious reuse, but it's certainly not the only possibility. The Chicago Collaborative Archive Center is proof. The Archive Center plan is a solid alternate, which calls for all rear windows to be bricked up. It's brilliant, it's creative, and its stakeholders are highly motivated to proceed. The Archive Center plan enjoys strong stakeholder support from over 20 national archives and universities, support of Chicago elected officials, civic leaders, editorial boards of leading Chicago papers, and a petition with over 22,750 signatures. Despite widespread coverage in the press and media, in order for the GSA to advance their demolition inevitability argument, it appears they would prefer to ignore this rather inconvenient alternative. As the Chicago Collaborative Archive Center reuse plan was specifically designed to address the security issues, the GSA's demolition inevitability argument simply no longer holds up. And there is so much more at stake here than just the terracotta skyscrapers. Chicago's early skyscrapers are currently under consideration for UNESCO World Heritage Site. If the Century and Consumers buildings were to be demolished, it would jeopardize eligibility for this extraordinary designation and international recognition. The GSA is solely responsible for the building's deteriorated condition. Prior to the GSA taking ownership through eminent domain in 2005, both buildings were in reasonably good condition. Today, the buildings are significantly deferred and demolition by neglect is prohibited by Chicago law. Thank you again, and we fully support all the efforts you're making.
Thank you, Mr. Natterson.
Next we have Michael Edwards.
Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Great.
Go ahead, Mr. Edwards.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to the Landmarks Commission today with regards to 202-220 South State Street. My name is Michael Edwards. I'm the president and CEO of the Chicago Loop Alliance. Chicago Loop Alliance is located at 55 West Monroe Street. I'm here also to request the commission to take actions to prevent the demolition of these 2 important buildings to the street face along State Street. The Chicago Loop Alliance manages and promotes a high-performing urban experience that is attractive to people and to investors. Those buildings renovated would speak to that and allow us to continue to provide a wide range of services up and down State Street. We administer the special service area on State Street, and the buildings that the GSA has owned for the last 25 years have been a real detriment to our efforts on State Street, especially South State Street. If there's a poor manager of properties, the GSA would be the top of my list. The loss of economic activity from those buildings is significant. And while I have very little preservation street cred, I would like just to speak to the economic loss. So right now, properties up and down State Street pay, a significant amount of money in exchange for a higher level of service, enhanced services. That's what the SSA is all about. And those buildings not only do not contribute to that and haven't contributed to that for years, but their current state increases the amount of cost to the rest of the property owners around around those properties. In addition to that, the condition of those properties has continued to devalue all of the adjacent properties, which in many ways is very unfair. Any other property owner, they would have been taken back. And so we encourage the landmarks to use what powers that they have to stop the demolition of those properties and go and investigate these alternatives that have presented by some of the other speakers in today's meeting. The Chicago Loop Alliance represents 300 members, over 2,000 businesses in the Loop, and our 47-member board of directors is very much in favor of protecting these particular properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Next. Is there anybody further signed up to speak?
Yes, you have Holly Fiedler.
Yeah.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Commission, thank you for letting me have the opportunity to speak. My name is Holly Fiedler. I am the province archivist for the Sisters of St. Francis of Penance and Christian Charity. My province, Sacred Heart, is headquartered in Denver. We also have a province to the west and a province to the east. Our three provinces are part of an initiative called the Franciscan Central Archive Initiative. The FCA are lay staff sisters and brothers of Franciscan congregations, and we combined our collections document Franciscan congregations from 1849 to the present. These congregations often were called to areas to assist those that are generally underdocumented and have historical significance. Our congregations are in diminishment, and we are working to ensure a future care for our congregations' archival collections and legacy of its documents. Our vision is a sustainable collaborative repository for the combined archival collections of Franciscan congregations across the United States. It is from this that we found a working group of the Chicago Collaborative Archive Center. This fit with what our vision and needs are. We, like the Century and Consumers buildings, are looking for a secure site and believe that we can work well with the GSA because archival collections and storage require security without lights or without exterior lights and enclosed environments without windows for environmental control. This fits the needs to have 0 windows on the back side of those buildings. So we believe that we can work well with the GSA's concerns because we too share the need for security. We also share the need and vision for preservation and perpetuity that we believe works with the Landmarks Commission as well as Chicago. These buildings are unique and irreplaceable, just as our collections are, and we have a need to save both. So a collaborative archive center offers opportunities for research and has efficiencies for a shared space such as classrooms, lecture halls, and library reading space. We believe that working together and having these efficiencies also helps us with the funding issue, for which we've found various avenues that could assist with this. We thank you to consider keeping these landmarked.
Thank you, Ms. Fiedler.
Ms. Elizabeth Blasius, you have to press unmute on your mic. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Great. Good afternoon, Landmarks Commission, and good afternoon, staff and everyone on the call. I'm Elizabeth Blasius, architectural historian and co-founder of Preservation Futures. And I'm going to make my 3 minutes 2 minutes because I'm anxious to hear what Landmarks has to say regarding these buildings. And like all of you, I hope the informational meeting is positive and that it means the staff, commission, and DPD broadly have heard Chicago and are ready to move to landmark these buildings to prevent demolition. We know how significant these buildings are because they are part of life in the loop. These buildings are State Street. The Century and Consumers buildings cannot be razed. And I'll say that again. The Century and Consumers buildings cannot be razed. And we must not be bullied by the GSA in thinking that demolition is the only option. The GSA has been land banking these buildings for years, which was contributed to its neglect. And as we work within our ongoing pandemic, that land banking has decimated the urban activity of State Street between Madison and Monroe. If you walk down State Street this afternoon, you'll see the vacancies. And if the GSA has the ability to demolish buildings so close to the Dirksen Courthouse, it has the ability to care for and manage the Century and Consumers buildings, just like it cares for the Dirksen. These buildings can be mitigated against almost any threat. And the GSA, as our nation's largest landlord, they must be held accountable for how it manages properties in Chicago. It's the destruction of buildings like these across the loop that kickstarted the preservation movement broadly in the 1960s. The public demand to preserve buildings just like these is why the Landmarks Division, the Commission, the staff was established. Landmarking will save these buildings from demolition, and it was developed exactly to do that. But this is bigger than preservation. It's urbanism, it's climate mitigation, it's economics. This is our city. But preservation can play a role in giving the Century and Consumers buildings a new life. I support a preliminary landmark designation status to be drafted by the building as soon as possible. And all of these folks here in preservation, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, we're all here to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Chairman, I don't see any other hands raised.
Wonderful. Okay, I believe that's all the members of the general public who have indicated they want to speak on agenda items. Therefore, this concludes the public comment portion of the meeting, and we'll go through the agenda at this time. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. You all had that in your packages. If I'd like to request a motion to approve those minutes of the May 5th, 2022 regular commission meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
That's moved by
Commissioner Burns.
Commissioner Burns, second.
Second, Commissioner Dukevich.
Is moved and second. I'll do the roll call. Commissioner Hughes.
Yes.
Commissioner Ponce.
Yes.
And I also approve that the minutes are approved. Second item on the agenda is the preliminary landmark recommendation for the Epworth Church building located at 5253 North Kenmore Avenue. This is in the 48th Ward. Mr. Crawford, if you could give us a report.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioners, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Wonderful. So for your consideration with this item is a preliminary landmark recommendation for Epworth, which consists of the 1891 church building at left, as well as its community house addition from 1930 at right on the slide. Architecturally, the church is, if not unique, a very rare example of fieldstone architecture in Chicago that used uncoarse granite boulders in its wall construction. Epworth was listed in the National Register in 2008, and it is published in the AIA Guide to Chicago. The congregation no longer worships at Epworth and currently the Northern Illinois Conference of the United Methodist Church is marketing the property for sale. Epworth is located at Berwyn and Kenmore, 7 miles north of the Loop in Edgewater. We believe it meets 4 criteria for Chicago landmark designation, including criterion 1 for heritage. Part of Epworth's heritage value is that it shows how Edgewater developed. This rendering of the church by its architect from 1889 depicts it as a picturesque suburban scaled church that would look at home in the English countryside. This design reflects Edgewater's first phase of growth as a leafy retreat that attracted Victorian era Chicagoans seeking open space, access to the lake, and convenient transit to downtown jobs. Another aspect of Epworth is its social heritage of collective and common effort that brought the site to fruition. The land on which it sits was granted to the congregation by John Cochran, the developer of Edgewater. The design of the building was donated by Frederick Townsend, a congregation member who is also an architect, and funds for the construction were raised by subscription from members of the community, many of whom were not members of the congregation. Like most houses of worship in Chicago, Epworth's heritage reminds us of the important role that religious institutions played in the social fabric of Chicago. In addition to heritage, we believe that Epworth, both in its church building and community house addition, also meets criterion for architecture. As I mentioned earlier, the church, as well as the addition, are constructed of uncoarced granite fieldstone. As you heard, the boulders came from a property in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, owned by a founding member of the congregation. They were shipped by lake on a barge from Racine and unloaded at a pier at the end of Berwyn Avenue, which at the time was a lot closer to the building site. Here are a few details of the fieldstone wall. The granite is left in its natural shape and form and exhibits a wide variety of colors. This type of wall construction requires tremendous design skill as well as very highly skilled masonry construction. The result is a wall that emphasizes interest through shadow, mass, and natural form. Here's the gabled front of the church, framed by a 65-foot tall belfry, which is itself braced with a round turret. On the south elevation, there's an octagonal tower. The entrance portico, or narthex, is from a 1930 renovation and is built of cast stone with Romanesque detail. Here is one of the side elevations that are nearly identical. Gothic revival wall buttresses frame window bays. The windows themselves are trimmed with Joliet limestone and have arc glass casements. Here's the east end, the rear of the church, which includes a transverse volume topped with a cross gable. The rear elevation facing the alley is unusual, and it's also finished with granite. As noted earlier, the second architectural component of Epworth is this addition known as the community house. It's a complementary design. It came from the accomplished Chicago firm of Thielbar and Fugard. It was completed in 1930 to address the growing needs of the congregation. The exterior of the community house combines granite fieldstone with crisp cast stone walls. The cast stone is a refined form of concrete cast in custom molds to mimic carved stone, and it was a new material in 1930. The entrance bay at left is rendered with Gothic towers, while the window bay at right features an arcaded corbel table, a Romanesque architectural element. With respect to the architects who shaped this place, we believe that both the designer of the 1891 church, Fred Townsend, and the architects of the 1930 addition all meet criterion 5. In addition to Epworth, notable works by Townsend include the 5 houses on Avers, the Chicago Landmark District in North Lawndale, which is attributed in its entirety to Townsend. He also designed the Grotzinger House, a prominent building in the Arlington Demi district, as well as the reconstruction of the South Tower of Scottish Rite Cathedral in the Washington Square district. These are all well-detailed masonry buildings from the 19th century and revival styles of architecture, all very much like his work at Epworth. A generation after Townsend, the partnership of Thielbard and Fugard designed the community house at Epworth. Other significant works by the firm include the Trustee System Service Building and the McGraw-Hill Building, both designated Chicago landmarks. Finally, we believe that Epworth strongly meets the criterion for unique visual feature. As I've said, the wall construction is very unusual and probably unique in the city, and the picturesque towers establish Epworth as a familiar visual feature in the Edgewater neighborhood. In addition to the numbered criteria, Epworth also meets the separate integrity criterion. Though its original suburban context has changed, at 131 years old, this building possesses excellent physical integrity in terms of design and materials. The comparison of the circa 1920 photo at left and the current photo at right shows that the major changes include the community house addition and the narthex at the entrance, both from 1930 and both having achieved historical significance in their own right. Epworth is located in the 48th Ward, and Alderman Osterman has expressed his support for this landmark designation. You've heard from a number of community members. As I noted, the congregation no longer worships at Epworth, and the Methodist Designation is marketing the property for sale. They are aware of the proposed designation. Should you agree, we recommend that the significant features of the building be identified as all exterior elevations, including roof lines of the church building and community house addition. I'm here to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Does the commission have any questions for Matt at this time? If not, we can go on to Pastor Jones as well as Alderman Osterman. Pastor Jones?
Yes, thank you for letting me join you today. I am with our denomination here in the Northern Illinois Conference with a nonprofit called Church Properties Reimagined. So we help congregations in our conference deal with issues around their building. And I'm the executive director for that nonprofit, and I'm glad to be with you today, and have found Matt Crawford and Alderman Osterman to be very good to work with on this project. And our desire is to preserve the exterior of this building for the community. We got involved last spring in 2021, because the city had to have the rear wall of the church addition, the addition that was built on as brick, and it was getting ready to fall into the alley. And at that time, the congregation couldn't afford to do the repairs on that wall. And in fact, since the early 2000s, has not been able to afford the maintenance on the church. And so Church Properties Reimagined, we paid off the cost of repairing the back wall of $108,000 last June 1st in 2021. And then as part of that, the congregation has asked us to sell the church on their behalf. At that time, they were worshiping less than 20 people in attendance on a Sunday. And currently, now that the church's congregation has moved out of that church, they have about 6 members. And so they have really been unable to afford that church. And so last summer, I met with Alderman Osterman and a developer that is interested in buying the property and are hopeful. We met June 15th with Matt Crawford from the Landmark Commission with zoning, and Alderman Osterman and myself, and we're have another meeting on July 26th. And my hope is that the developer and will be able to come up with a plan for reuse of the building, which would be residential, and to preserve the exterior of the building, but it would mean changing the interior of the building. And so our hope is that those details will get worked out so that everyone will be happy with the final solution to reuse it as a residential unit while preserving the exterior of the building and changing the interior. During the spring and here into the early summer, because we were moving towards a residential reuse of the interior of the building, much of the woodwork, trim, and doors have been sold by the congregation and repurposed in other places. The organ that is in the church is going to be donated to a church on the eastern part of the United States. So they are paying somewhere in six figures to have the organ taken out of the church and make reuse of it. So the organ wouldn't get destroyed. It would just be used at a different location. One of our prospective buyers that we looked at had an engineering firm come in and look at the building, and they estimated the cost of taking care of deferred maintenance and structural issues in the building of $2 to $2.4 million. And that was taking care of deferred maintenance, structural issues that are present, and just making the building usable in its current structure without making any changes. And that's really why we're looking at selling it for the congregation, is that now with the congregation the size it is and them not being able to afford the maintenance on the building for the last 20 years, it's just too big for them beyond their capabilities. And so we're hoping with the developer working with Alderman Osterman that we'll be able to come up with a solution that will preserve the outside of the building, but allow it to be reused in an affordable manner, that the money could be put into a building to rehab and preserve the architectural exterior while being able to make it economically feasible for a developer to do that. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have for me.
Thank you, Pastor Jones.
Opportunity.
Thank you, Pastor Jones. Alderman Osterman, I apologize. Thanks for your patience.
Oh, this has been great. And I'll say how lucky I am that all of my neighbors and those who support historic preservation joined to support the preliminary designation of Epworth Church as historic landmarking. So I'm a really lucky individual to have so many committed people. And Chairman Wong and members of the commission, I want to be very clear that I strongly support the preliminary landmark designation of Epworth Church. I really want to recognize Dejana Kuvala, Matt Crawford, and Kandalaya Han from the Department of Planning, who have been working tirelessly on this issue. Appreciate their presentation. I think all of you who listen to the comments from my community members know that for 131 years, Epworth has been an anchor in the community. And it's been a community gathering place for religion, for community events, through the highs and lows that my community has gone through over the last 131 years. It's very important that we keep the building preserved as a landmark. I will tell you that you probably understand that there's a lot of times where people don't agree on certain things. There is strong, united support within my community to landmark this property. I think that it's been highlighted with great eloquence from many people, the Edgewater Historical Society and other neighbors that are there, what this has meant in the community. And it's my goal to make sure that the building is one, landmarked, and then two, if there is something that is a positive win-win, that could take place. There are, as Mr. Jones pointed out, there are ongoing conversations, but I'll also be very clear to the commission that we're here today also because a demolition permit was sought by an entity working or alongside the developer to knock the building down. And, we have a great sense of urgency to make sure that this preliminary landmark designation moves forward. And we begin the process to preserve the building. And if those other conversations to have an adaptive reuse work out, then we'll be back to talk to you about that. But it would only be done so in a way that would be in conformity with the historic designation. So I'm here in strong unison with my colleagues or my neighbors to ask your support today to the preliminary landmark designation of Epworth Church. And I'm happy to answer any questions if needed.
Thank you, Alderman. Does the commission have any questions or comments for Pastor Jones or Alderman Osterman? And please speak up. I'm looking to see. Commissioner Hughes, please.
Yes, I just want to commend you guys for exploring the different options that could happen with this structure. Adaptive reuse is highly appreciated here at the commission and as an option for preservation. Also, the overwhelming amount of outpour of support from your community is noted, and we received a lot of that in our packets. And so the construction is the last thing I'll comment on. Is I've never seen anything like it. It's absolutely unique and beautiful, the limestone and granite, and I'm extremely excited to hear that this building will be preserved and considered a landmark in the future. So you guys have my support. And also the other thing I would say, which is more of a question, is I know that you are converting this to residential, but is there a small portion of the building that could still be used for community? And furthermore, could tell the story and history of the building for time and time to come for the rest of the community to access?
This is Pastor Mike. I can't answer that question specifically because right now the developer is putting together preliminary plans for Alderman Osterman, the Landmark Commission, and zoning to look at. And the developer is on a honeymoon coming back tomorrow. That's why the developer couldn't be on this call. But I anticipate that those plans will be to everyone concerned prior to our July 26th meeting is my hope. So that at that meeting, we'd be able to figure out what moving forward. So I don't know what kind of, if there is community space or what that might look like in this structure in addition to residential. I know the developer's plan is primarily residential, but I have no idea about community space in it.
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I very much appreciate your point. I think that me and the Edgewater Historical Society would look for opportunities in really kind of telling the story of Epworth Church. And that could be done in many positive different ways. So I think that's something that we'll take up. I think the goal is to have a building that is welcoming. I think it's important to point out that tonight there's, and ongoing, there is a shelter for men that are homeless there. And I appreciate Mr. Jones allowing that shelter to remain there, but it is a place of shelter for people. We're working actively to make sure that shelter stays within our community and those men have the ability to get shelter every day. But we're having that, I think the goal is always to have functional space that would be used for community. And I think as conversations move forward, that would be a priority and a goal as well.
Great. Happy, very, very happy to hear that. And I look forward to seeing this space in the future when it's converted.
Okay, are there any other questions, comments? I was happy to hear that the organ will go to another location as well. I think that's really important as well. Pastor Jones and Alderman Osterman, thank you so much for your time. If there are no other questions, I'd like to request a motion to adopt a preliminary landmark recommendation for the Epworth Church building. Is there a motion?
So moved. Commissioner Yurkevich.
And is there a second? And second by Commissioner Hughes. I'll do the roll call. Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Ponce.
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. The motion carries unanimously. Good luck, and we'll see you in the future. Thank you so much for all of your.
Thank you very much for your support today. We greatly appreciate it.
You got it.
Thank you for the opportunity to meet with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Our next item is the Citywide Adoptive Landmark Fund application for the KAM Isaiah Israel Temple in the 4th Ward. This is at 1100 East Hyde Park Boulevard. Dan, if you could give us a presentation on this.
Hi, Chairman. This is Matt Crawford. Dan is out sick unexpectedly, so I'm going to.
Matt, we'd love to hear from you.
Attempt to pinch hit for him. So, at your December meeting last year, we informed you of 12 projects conditionally awarded grants for the 2021 Adopt a Landmark application round. Each of these needs to come back to the commission when they complete their budget. And so KAM has completed their budget, and it's before you today. They're requesting $250,000 and AAL funding for a stained glass window restoration project. The total for it is $430,946. This is in addition to a $2.1 million investment in capital improvements at the temple that will include extensive exterior and roof work. KAM is located at 1100 East Hyde Park Boulevard in Kenwood in the 4th Ward. Building was constructed in 1924 by architect Alfred Alschuler. It houses the oldest Jewish congregation in the Midwest. It dates back to 1847. This building was designated in 1977, and it's well known for its stained glass windows, which depict scenes from Hebrew scripture. The scope of the AL project will focus solely on the restoration of stained glass windows that were last repaired about 30 years ago. The windows work will restore various window types at the temple. This slide shows one of the large sanctuary balcony level windows. Some examples of other windows in the sanctuary. These are examples of less colorful but still significant windows in the lobby. There are approximately 21 of these. The project also includes replacement of exterior protective glazing. All of the existing protective glazing will be replaced with 1/4-inch fake glass that will be properly vented to ensure the longevity of the repair. The resolution before you for this application is, again, $250,000 from the AAL fund for a $430,000 project. This resolution and exhibit was included in the packet. In addition to that, there is Exhibit A that includes conditions of approval for the project, that the applicant will submit a
permit application to us, that any unforeseen conditions that emerge they will notify staff, and that the applicant will enter into an escrow agreement to ensure that the project is completed and paid for in a timely manner. And that at the end of the project, we'll be provided documentation so that we can bring this back to the commission to let you know that the project is completed. Should you vote to approve the project, the partner will then enter into a written agreement with the applicant that will incorporate this information, and the temple plans to begin work this fall. The project is located in the 4th Ward, and Alderman King, I think, is on the call, or perhaps your staff apprentice Butler. In addition, Taylor Regali from the Prado Regali, the stained glass restoration firm, is on the call, as are Fred Stein and Scott Nelson from the temple, representing the congregation. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Does the commission have any questions for Matt at this time? If not, let's go on to the applicant, Mr. Nelson. Would you like to make a statement?
I believe Mr. Nelson had to leave the call.
Yeah, I'd like to pass this over to Fred Stein, please.
Okay.
On behalf of the congregation, we are extremely grateful for this consideration. As Matt spoke, we are in the midst of an extensive rehabilitation of our almost 100-year-old building. We have done extensive masonry repairs and roof work, and look forward to moving to the interior restoration of the space. And certainly a large component of that would be the stabilization of our our wonderful stained glass windows. And it's with the Adopt a Landmark funding that we have added this project to our work, and it's now a very important component of it. And we're grateful and hope this will be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. Does the commission have any questions for Mr. Stein? And actually, I would like to hear from, I believe it's Ms. Regali regarding the stain issue. Is that with the stained glass company that's working on this?
Hi.
Hi. Could you just talk a little bit about the process, just very briefly, please?
Yeah, so my name is Taylor Regali with DePrado Regali. My family's company has, I'm the representative for the project at the moment. My dad is the project manager, Bob Regali. He would be in charge of all of the restoration process for all of it. We've been restoring stained glass and doing a lot of basically anything that you could find in a church restoration wise for over 100 years. And we would be very excited to work on this project as well. If you have any questions, I can definitely go ahead, and my dad is actually on the call as well, and he can answer any questions that you may have about the specifics of the stained glass and all of that. If you have any questions, let me know.
I was specifically looking at the, it seemed like the condition of the stained glass seemed, pretty much intact. I guess the last restoration project was done about 30 years ago. Is it typical every 30 years that, or so that something needs to be done? Or is it more of the surround that has been affected that requires the work?
Taylor, say every 30 to 50 years, depending on the...
Basically every 30 to 50 years based on the conditions, and the exterior protection glass is what would be affected, what would affect the stained glass the most. But every 30 to 50 years is estimated.
Okay. And I was just wondering about the surround itself and the condition of that.
May I speak to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Stein.
We first protected our stained glass with plexiglass when that became a sort of the state-of-the-art technique for doing it. And we did that probably about 40 some years ago or more. And unfortunately, when we did it initially, it was a new technique. It didn't get done exactly right. And when we addressed the windows again in the early 1990s, we upgraded the plexiglass protection and provided proper venting and installation of that material. And it served us well over that time. But as Bob Regali was saying to his daughter, you know, time and gravity on stained glass windows cause them to sag, cause them to move. The heating and cooling process that's inevitable in any building is also disruptive to the integrity of the windows. So that will be addressed in the restoration process. And then the plexiglass will be replaced. The exterior protection will now be plate glass, quarter-inch plate glass, which is a much more satisfactory product and is the current state of the art, as I understand it, for how it should properly be protected. And these will be carefully and thoroughly vented so that the heat buildup and stuff does not occur to provide any distortion to it, but rather the glass will be a protective element as is appropriate and needed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stein, appreciate it.
Yep.
Mr. Butler, would you like to say anything?
Absolutely. So good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to say that Camp Isaiah is one of the crown jewels of the Kenwood area. It's a beautiful building. I had a chance to do a walkthrough last summer, and the building is absolutely stunning. It is a landmark building in our community. The congregation is a stakeholder in our community that we've worked with over the years, and we're supportive of this process and make sure that this crown jewel of the Kenwood area is able to sustain itself well into the 22nd century. And the work that the group is doing at the church right now, the synagogue right now, is beautiful. And we're supportive of this effort to make sure they have additional resources to protect the stained glass windows in that facility. So without further ado, we'd like to say we wholeheartedly support this process.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Does any of the commission have any questions for the applicant or Mr. Butler? If not, I'd like to request a motion to approve a resolution for a citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund grant for the KAM Isaiah Israel Temple. Is there a motion?
So moved.
And second?
Second, Commissioner Hughes.
Second, Commissioner Hughes. We'll do the roll call. Commissioner Burns?
Yes.
Commissioner Ponce?
Yes.
And I am also a yes. The motion carries. Thank you very much, folks, and thanks for your patience. We'll go on to the next item.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Beautiful project, yeah. This is for the Citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund application for the Second Presbyterian Church in Third Ward, 1936 South Michigan Avenue. And Matt, I guess you're back on.
Thank you, Chairman Wong. This is the second application for Adopt a Landmark Fund for your consideration. The congregation at Second Presbyterian Church is requesting $250,000 in AAL funds for interior restoration work to the fellowship hall and parlor room with a total budget of $508,000. In addition to the work that I'll show you today, just like the temple, the Second Presbyterian Church is undertaking a significant capital improvement campaign totaling an expenditure of an additional $900,000. The church is located at 1936 South Michigan Avenue in the near South Side community area and in the Third Ward. I think many of us know Second Pres. It's arguably one of the finest Gothic revival churches in Chicago, and certainly one of the finest arts and crafts interiors in the nation. The building was designated a Chicago landmark in 1977. So the area of work is going to be in this part of the building at the rear, which is basically a transept that is known as the Parish House. In plan, the project will improve 2 rooms in the Parish House, both on the first floor. Both of these rooms are open to the public and to host various community meetings and events from time to time. The first room is the Fellowship Hall, shaded here in blue. And the second area is the North Parlor, which is highlighted in green. And so if this is an interior project, this is the current view of the Fellowship Hall room. The windows, wooden wainscoting, and arched reliefs will remain, as well as the stained glass. Here's a rendering of the proposed changes, which will replace the ceiling with a coffered ceiling with integrated lighting. Wood wainscoting will be added to columns, and the floor finishes will be changed from carpet to hardwood. Here's the current view of the North Parlor room, very similar to the Fellowship, just smaller. The scope of work here includes a new wall to enclose the room, as indicated in yellow in the plan, as well as windows, millwork for doors, windows, and casings to match the existing, as well as thermal insulation. The resolution before you, as I said, includes $250,000 in AAL funds for a $500,000 project. As with the temple, there are conditions that the applicant will submit a permit for our review, that they'll notify us of any undocumented conditions that arise during the project, and that they will enter into an escrow agreement with us, and upon completion, notify us and provide documentation so that we can bring this back to you. And should you vote to approve, we will enter into an agreement to get the work going. The project is located in the 3rd Ward, and I believe Brian Friedman from Alderman Dowell's staff is on the call as our representatives of Second Presbyterian Church.
Thank you, Matt. Does the commission have any questions for Matt at this time? Seeing none, Mr. Friedman, would you like to make a statement?
Certainly, Chairman Wong, thank you so much. My name is Brian Friedman. I work for 3rd Ward Alderman Pat Dowell. I'd like to express Alderman Dowell's happiness and support for this project. Second Presbyterian Church has been a crown jewel of the South Loop for many, many years, and a wonderful, wonderful partner for the community. They host numerous community events, fundraisers, outreach. We've hosted events there, and the farmers market used to be located at the church. There's really good representatives for the community. The back area is being renovated right now. Just needs a little love to come up to the standard of the rest of the church. And it's highly visible from the street and from the inside as well. So we really do support this project, and we thank the commission and the Department of Planning and Development for working with us to get the funding needed to assist this church. Thank you, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. And Reverend Neff, I know that you had already spoken. Is there anything further you'd like to say before I call for a motion?
We're thankful for the designation and the funding, and it will be a life changer for many people in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the commission have any questions for either Mr. Friedman or Mr. Neff? Seeing none, I would like to request a motion to approve the resolution for the Citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund grant for the Second Presbyterian Church. Is there a motion?
So moved, Commissioner Burns.
Second.
Commissioner, and a second by Commissioner Jerkowitz. We'll do the roll call. Commissioner Hughes. Commissioner Hughes.
Sorry, yes.
Commissioner Ponce.
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. The motion carries unanimously. Congratulations. Great project again.
Thank you so much.
Okay, let's go on to the next item on the agenda is program committee report. This is for the recommendations to the Illinois Historic Sites Advisory Council and nominations to the National Register of Historic Places. And, Commissioner Burns, I'll just let you go ahead. We've already mentioned the 1, 2, 3, 4 items.
Okay, thank you. I want to report that the program committee met on June 21st, 2022 to hear public comments on 4 suggestions for possible landmark designation that have been received from the public since the previous program committee meeting. The suggestions and comments have been forwarded to Historic Preservation Division staff for further review and consideration. No action by the full commission. I also want to report that the program committee reviewed on behalf of the full commission 4 nominations for the National Register of Historic Places. The commission's review of these nominations is under its authority as a certified local government under the National Historic Preservation Act, which gives the commission the opportunity to comment on National Register nominations for Chicago properties. The nominations are listed on today's commission agenda, and I'm going to go ahead, Chairman, if you don't mind, and mention them again. They are the Cornelia at 3500 North Lakeshore Drive in Ward 46, Chicago Vocational School at 2100 East 87th Street in Ward 8, Motor Row additional information at the 2200, 2300, and 2400 blocks of South Michigan Avenue, including portions of the adjacent blocks of Wabash and Indiana Avenues between Cermak and the Stevenson Expressway in Ward 3. And finally, the James E. Clue building at 2635 to 2645 South Wabash Avenue, also in Ward 3. The program committee voted to recommend that the full commission support these National Register nominations. You received a recommendation to that effect in your packets. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Burns. Are there any questions for Commissioner Burns regarding these nominations? If not, then I'd like to request a motion to approve the recommendations of the program committee on the 4 nominations to the National Register of Historic Places. Is there a motion?
So moved, Commissioner Ponce.
Thank you, Commissioner Ponce. Is there a second?
Seconded, Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you. We'll do the roll call. Commissioner Drickowitz.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
And I am a yes also. The motion carries. So, next item on the agenda is the other business. This is informational presentation on the Century and Consumers buildings at located at 202 and 220 South State Street. Before I ask staff to make a presentation, I want to explain as to why I asked for this item to be put on the agenda. DPD staff and I have reviewed multiple communications regarding the Century and Consumer buildings at 202 and 220 South State Street, expressing concern regarding the threat of demolition. I've asked staff to put together an informational presentation to provide us with a background on these buildings and recent developments. I felt it was important, considering the significance of these buildings, that the commission get an update from staff and an overview of what's been happening recently so they can have a wider discussion. So with that, Kendallin, if you could give this report, please, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So good afternoon. This is an informational presentation, as Chairman Wong said, regarding the Century and Consumers building. It touches on the history of the buildings and recent developments. The most significant recent development was the approval of $52 million for demolition of the buildings from 202 through 220 South State Street, included in the Federal Appropriations Act signed into law on March 15 of this year. The demolition funds approved would include the Century and Consumers buildings. Here's the Century building, located at 202 South State at the southwest corner of State and Adams. Consumers Building at 220 South State is on the same block, but sits on the north side of Quincy. At the time the Consumers Building was built, Quincy was a through street, and both the south and east elevations of this building seen in the photo would have been street facing. In 1960, the City Council passed an ordinance to vacate the western half of Quincy for construction of a new federal courts building stretching from Adams to Jackson. The eastern half of Quincy became a pedestrian plaza. In 2017, a barrier was put up to prevent access to the plaza, and a guard station has since been added. The Century and Consumers buildings, shown in yellow here, are contributing structures to the National Register's Loop Retail Historic District, shown in light blue, which was added to the register in 1998. To provide context for the Consumers and Century buildings, this is a view looking north up State Street. The Consumers building is on the left, and the Century building is the shorter brick and terracotta building to its right, conveniently has the 202 painted on the common brick side elevation. To help orient you, to the rear or west of both of these buildings is the Dirksen Federal Courthouse, seen at the left edge of the photo. At the north end of State Street, towards the top right of the photo, is Marina City. Further south on State Street is Block 37. Looking the other direction, south on State Street, the Century building is on the right and the Consumers is on the left. For reference, the red brick Harold Washington Library is toward the bottom of the photo. The UIC John Marshall Law School building is closer, just one block south of the Century building. And finally, in this view, we're pivoting to look west along Adams Street at the right. In the far distance, at the right of this photo, you can see the Willis Tower. The Dirksen Federal Courthouse is the tall black building to the right of the Century building. And between those two structures are the 3- and 4-story buildings forming the Berghoff restaurant. Looking directly at the Consumers and Century buildings from across State Street, you see two smaller buildings between them. The 3-story building with a light tan facade at 212 was constructed in 1920, but has been substantially remodeled with a plain stucco facade. The 4-story building at 214 was constructed in 1875. Originally 6 stories, the top 2 floors were removed during construction of the adjacent Consumers building. Its facade has also been substantially remodeled and is now covered in black metal panels. So for a little history of the Century and Consumers buildings, here's the Century building constructed between 1915 and 1916. As you've heard, it was designed by Holabird and Roche, one of Chicago's most well-known and prolific architectural firms. It is 16 stories tall and was originally called the 20th Century building. The street-facing elevations were clad in cream white terracotta, one of the preferred schemes for State Street employed by Holabird and Roche and other architects of the Chicago School of Architecture. These comparison photos from 1940 on the left and 2022 on the right help to convey how the landmark quality Century building remains relatively unchanged. And this, of course, is the Consumers building. It was named for the coal and ice delivery company, which occupied the upper floors shortly after the building's completion in 1913. This structure was designed by the successful architectural firm of Mundy and Jensen, former partners of William LeBaron Jenney, a leader in the Chicago School of Architecture. You can see that white terracotta was used on the exterior of the Consumers as well, adding to the concentration of these light terracotta-clad skyscrapers, which made State Street so visually distinctive. And here's the Consumers building in 1960 on the left, and of course 2022 on the right, showing how this stretch of State Street remains remarkably intact. The Consumers and Century buildings were purchased by the federal government in 2005. In this view, looking northwest, you can see them in relation to the building occupying the western half of the block, the Dirksen Federal Courthouse. Shifting our view downward, here is Quincy Street with the Consumers building on the right and the Dirksen again at the upper left. This map shows the buildings owned by the federal government in this part of the loop. The Consumers and Century buildings are in the upper right, outlined in yellow. And And all buildings on that block, except for the Berghoff restaurant at the north side, are currently owned by the federal government. This is also the case for the block to the west and for one large office building to the south across Jackson. All the buildings in the purple dashed box at right were purchased by the federal government around 2005 to provide them with expansion opportunities and to improve security for the Dirksen Courthouse. Since then, the federal government has made various repairs and improvements to the buildings and the pedestrian experience of those buildings not in use. The Century and Consumers buildings have remained vacant since 2005. In 2015, the General Services Administration issued an RFP for the block of buildings at 202 through 220 South State, but the development did not move forward. Since demolition funding was approved in March of this year for that block of buildings, there has been significant press coverage in print, radio, and on TV. Senator Dick Durbin responded to a piece in the Sun-Times calling for reuse of the Century and Consumers buildings with his own editorial. In it, he stated that, quote, multiple security assessments made clear that the security risks were too great, end quote, and that, quote, there has been no plan put forward for private development that has adequately addressed the security risks, end quote. The Century and Consumers buildings made Landmarks Illinois and Preservation Chicago's most endangered building lists. The Commission's program committee received suggestions they be landmarked. The Commission and DPD staff have received a large number of communications regarding these architecturally and historically significant buildings, asking that the Commission designate or take action to protect the structures. The city was CC'd on a letter dated May 10th, 2022 from the General Services Administration, responding to a letter from Landmarks Illinois, Preservation Chicago, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. In it, the GSA indicated that there are several reviews they were obligated to undertake before making the decision to proceed with demolition, and that viable alternatives would be explored, likely starting late this summer. And this concludes the staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendallin. Does the commission have any questions of Kendallin at this time?
No questions, Chairman. I just want to thank Kendallin and the entire historic preservation staff for putting together such a thoughtful presentation. And also thank you, Chairman Wong, for requesting some time on our agenda to learn more about and discuss this issue.
Thank you, Commissioner Burns. One of the things, excuse me, there are representatives from the Dirksen Courthouse and a representative from the GSA has sent letters that they've asked to be read into the record. In addition, Chief Judge Paulmeyer, I believe, is on this call right now. Judge Paulmeyer, would you like to make a statement prior to me reading your letter as well as the GSA letter?
Most of what I have to say is in the statement that we have provided to the commission. I do want to thank Ms. Hahn for the historic review. That was useful to me personally, although I'm familiar with some of the details. I think it's important for you to know that we in the court are sensitive to the concerns of preservation and history. We in fact have a history museum in our own court. Our original courthouse, which stood across the street where the post office now is, was an architectural treasure that we lost over time years ago, and we're sensitive to these concerns. We're also fundamentally most concerned about our security and safety. And although the suggestion has been made that other buildings are equally close to this one and pose similar threats, I just don't think that's true. We have done a great deal of work on exploring the safety and security concerns. If there is a way to preserve portions of the facades or otherwise memorialize what's there, we would be open to that. We recognize, again, that this is an issue that draws a lot of attention, but we think there really are benefits to a proposal that would eliminate those buildings, particularly for State Street, because as things stand now, The buildings are, as you know, vacant. Nothing is happening in them. Nobody walks in and out. That block of State Street is somewhat moribund. Were we to have access to our courthouse, the only one, by the way, built by Mies van der Rohe, the only courthouse that Mies built in his lifetime, we would, I think, bring a significant amount of foot traffic from State Street onto that plaza, which we do not expect will be, as has been suggested by many, some kind of a pile of rubble or gravel pit that we would leave there. We do expect to landscape the facility, to add green space, to make it an attractive opening to Federal Plaza, and to highlight the very significant architectural contribution that Mies made when he built the Dirksen building, expecting that it would open on the east side towards State Street. So I thank you for the attention, and I thank you for your careful consideration of this issue. We do fully intend to comply with our obligations under federal law, and that will involve a study of viable alternatives, recognizing that the cost to restore some of these buildings we understand greatly dwarf the amount that would cost for demolition. And I know that that's only one consideration before you at this commission. Again, I thank you very much for your thoughtful consideration here, and we are, of course, happy to answer any additional questions you may have.
Thank you, Judge Pallmeyer. Does the commission have any questions for the judge? If not, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go ahead and read the statements that were that you prepared, as well as the statement from the GSA. So this is a statement from the United States District Court, Northern District of Illinois, on behalf of the United States District Court to the Commission of Chicago Landmarks regarding proposed demolition properties at 202 to 220 South State Street for this commission meeting. The United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois appreciates the opportunity to submit a statement regarding the Century and Consumer buildings, two of the four federally owned properties in the 200 block of South State Street in Chicago. The Dirksen Courthouse, the largest federal courthouse in the nation, is located just feet from these buildings. The courthouse houses not only the district and bankruptcy courts for the Northern District of Illinois, but also the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit, the U.S. Attorney, and additional federal government offices. The four now vacant State Street buildings pose grave security concerns and threaten the safety of the courthouse itself and that of more than 70 judges, 1,200 employees, and thousands of members of the public who visit the Dirksen Courthouse each week to serve on juries, to be sworn in as new citizens, and to conduct business in the courthouse. Congress appropriated funds for purchase of these properties by the GSA, General Services Administration, GSA, in 2005. The specific purpose of this purchase was to protect the courthouse by creating a security buffer zone. The properties were expected to fill an anticipated need for federal office space in this location. Instead, GSA's need for tenant space has declined, but the need for a security buffer has greatly increased since 2005. At this point, the vacant buildings, which have suffered from structural problems for many years, are in critical disrepair. Congress therefore appropriated funds to demolish them and to secure landscape the areas surrounding Dirksen U.S. Courthouse, thus fulfilling the intention of that 2005 purchase. The court is proud to conduct its work in an edifice of remarkable elegance and world-renowned architectural significance. The redevelopment project will fortify security surrounding the courthouse, demolish the dilapidated structures, and create green space in a plaza between the courthouse and State Street. In addition, this project will help restore architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe's vision for the Chicago Federal Center complex, a vision of cubic simplicity, exposed structural steel, and elegant open proportion. We recognize that the proposed demolition of the abandoned buildings represents a loss, but this project will display the inviting open appearance of our courthouse, a mid-century modern architectural treasure. Our hope is that this much-needed security project will preserve public safety, enhance the dignity of the neighborhood, draw in visitors to the State Street corridor, and beautify that corridor as well as the Chicago Federal Center complex to the benefit of the public for years to come. We look forward to working with the City of Chicago and all consulting parties while following the National Historic Preservation Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. We do understand the need to consider viable reuse alternatives to demolition, recognizing the cost and benefits of these alternatives while maintaining our focus on the significant security concerns these buildings represent to the courthouse. And this is signed by Judge Paul Meyer. The second letter was from the GSA, again, statement from the GSA to the Commission on Chicago Landmarks regarding the proposed demolition of properties at 202 and 220 South State Street. GSA is committed to fulfilling its federal, statutory, and regulatory responsibilities under the National Historic Preservation Act and the National Environmental Policy Act as they apply to the federally owned properties located at 202 and 20 through 220 South State Street. Under these statutes, GSA will seek input regarding the proposed demolition action from the Commission on Chicago Landmarks, the Illinois State Historic Preservation Office, and others on how we may avoid, minimize, or mitigate adverse effects to these properties and their historic context while ensuring the security requirements of the adjacent federal courthouse are met. Furthermore, we recognize that as part of consultation, consideration of viable reuse alternatives to demolition will need to be examined by both GSA and the U.S. District Court. Currently, GSA is procuring professional services to conduct the NEPA and NHPA studies required to inform and engage the public in the consultation process. This process allows for public input and participation regarding the proposed action of demolition and consideration of viable alternatives. We plan to begin the NHPA Section 106 consultation process in late summer or fall of 2022 and recognize there is strong interest from the preservation community. GSA will provide public notices with dates and location of our upcoming meetings, and this is signed by Regina Nally, the Historic Preservation Officer of the GSA Great Lakes Regional Office. So these are the statements by both the U.S. District Court as well as the GSA, and I'd like to open it up for any discussion for the commission. Okay. Well, you know,
Chairman, I have a question.
Go ahead, Commissioner Burns.
Thank you. We heard from a number of public comments from historic preservation advocates and from folks who represent the consortium of archive organizations that are working on or that are advocating for a different use for these buildings. I wonder, do we know if those individuals, specifically the Archive Association or consortium, has presented a formal proposal to the Government Service Administration for the acquisition of the building?
That's a good question. Kendallin, would you happen to know?
I do know that, yeah, that was Preservation Chicago that worked with the group to make a presentation. I know that they did a public meeting, and I know that they have sent at least a narrative regarding that structure. I don't know that they've gotten as far as, you know, any sort of architectural details, but absolutely the context for that possible reuse was submitted to GSA by Preservation Chicago. That's my understanding.
To my knowledge, there was no formal proposal or plan that's been submitted by the archivists or the proposed archivists to use that property. I would certainly be interested in it. I think that the work that would need to be done in the buildings to make that possible is very significant. So I'd like to see what the proposal might be. To my knowledge, it has not been made formally.
Thank you, Judge Ballmeyer. Are there any other questions regarding this? I guess one of the issues that I have is, we have seen what has happened at Block 37, and by no means do we anticipate that the GSA would leave a pile of rubble there the way Block 37 was, and we certainly have seen the amount of work that has been done by, within, particularly along Dearborn, regarding safety and some of that plaza space. That being said, a lot of that plaza space ends up being pretty hardscaped, if you will, and for whatever reasons, safety and security reasons. But I've also noticed that Quincy Court also used to be open to the public for a period before barriers were put up. And I was wondering if anybody could talk a little bit about that.
Well, to the extent that I understand your question, Commissioner Wong, we would hope that our proposal would enable us to open the space and make our entrance to the courthouse face State Street, which was, by the way it was designed by Mies when he built the building. The expectation was that one would enter the courthouse from the east. In other words, that we would be open to the east side of the building, open to State Street. You may know that we have hundreds, sometimes thousands of visitors each week to our building in some instances, including throughout the pandemic. We had a great deal of foot traffic into the Dirksen Courthouse. If the building were to open to the east, as it was originally designed to, we would hope to make that an open plaza such that people can walk in and out, use the space, enter through security on that side of the building, and perhaps potentially use our lobby for the purpose that it was originally intended as well.
Yeah, I guess it does, it sort of answers the question. And just, my background, Judge Ballmeyer, is that I am a landscape architect and I design public plazas as part of my profession for well over 30 years.
I suspect you would have some terrific ideas for using this.
And I guess but that being said, one of the concerns that I've always had also, and that being said, and just for full disclosure, my father was one of the proteges of Mies van der Rohe. So, I've grown up with that international style my entire life. But one of the concerns I also have is the amount of sunlight that gets to these plaza spaces that are densely surrounding, open plazas. And, you could talk about that, but, even the usage of the park space just to the south along State and Van Buren is open. It's even open to sunlight, and it is it's a tough space that has been looked at for reuse and everything else. And looking at the history of that space as well, it has been really difficult to maintain that. So I don't, I have not seen the proposal or, what would happen, nor have I seen what Mies had in mind originally, which I think would be helpful to kind of take a look at that. But, understanding also that the corridor of State Street is really super important to the history of Chicago, as, in terms of not only its commercial use, but also the value of their buildings along that corridor. So I think there's a lot of examination that has to be done, as anything moves forward. Those are my comments.
I think that's right. I'm familiar with the plaza you're talking about at State and Van Buren, and obviously we are not anticipating that kind of a result. As things stand now, as you know, the buildings are in significant disrepair. And by the way, they were in poor shape in 2005 when GSA bought them. It isn't true that they have become dilapidated only in the last 17 years. People that worked in those buildings decades ago told me stories about the conditions they were in back then. But that aside, as things stand now, the terracotta is in really very dangerous conditions, such that, as you know, if you walk over there, you'll see that the building is surrounded by basically a net to catch the falling stone so that nobody is injured when they walk by. I mean, they're really in very, very poor shape. As a result, the current situation puts us in really diminishes the traffic on State Street, because there's nothing to go in there and see. Now, I realize the proposal that's being made, should it be made formally, would put an archive there. I don't know that would bring a lot of traffic in either. That's not necessarily a condition for a situation for your commission to consider, but it's something that is significant to all of us with respect to security. We do expect that our property would continue to be monitored by federal security, and that it would not result in a kind of an abandoned green space such as you see on further south on State Street.
Commissioner Burns, I think you had your hand up as well as Commissioner Ponce.
Thanks very much. Judge Pallmeyer, I want to say that I certainly understand and share the concern about security for individuals in that building. At the same time, I also am concerned that GSA is hanging its hopes on, or not its hopes, it's part of its case for demolishing these buildings and creating an open plaza as part of the vision of the architect. What you have described doesn't match the existing conditions when that building was built, nor does it match the existing conditions now. And the architect's was that part of his concept was a hope and a dream at some point versus the reality, and the reality hasn't changed. And while I feel that there is a compelling case for something that can protect security in the way that we feel that we need it for the federal government, I also feel like we need to take more time, especially considering the cost involved to the people of the country in demolishing this property, as opposed to the potential benefit of a reuse. And there's one, I guess we're not at the proposal stage, but one possibility, and there's been tremendous public interest. We saw over 22,000 signatures in a short period of time to save these buildings. And I think it's incredibly important that we take the time to explore more alternatives before the federal government pulls the trigger on a demolition. I mean, ultimately, that may be what we need to do because a realistic proposal doesn't come forward, but time is worth taking for something as important as these.
I agree completely. I think that's what the 106 process provided for by law is all about. I'm firmly committed to our, adhering to that process and considering the alternatives in a thoughtful way. I agree with you that we need to take the time that's necessary. With respect to the cost, I would just point out that taxpayers are paying to maintain the buildings right now, and including some urgent repairs that are being made with respect to the fire escapes. There's work being done to maintain and to ensure that the terracotta doesn't injure anybody. Not to the tune, obviously, of the amount that would cost for demolition, but the continued status is also costly. And I don't want to suggest that we should speed through this in any way. I'm completely with you, Commissioner Burns. We need to be responsible about what happens here. And your observations about the situation that was extant when Mies built those buildings is an important one.
Commissioner Ponce, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add what Commissioner Burns was saying is, definitely taking the time and considering the security measures that should not be taken lightly, of course, and that there are plausible ways of how to resolve this in order to be able to preserve the buildings that are so iconic and that have been listed on the endangered buildings list, that they're on the retail historic district, and they do have an iconic significance to the city of Chicago. And to be able to see that. And in addition to what Commissioner Chairman Wong has said, a number of examinations can be taken, and I'm very close in monitoring also the sustainability efforts of the GSA. The commitment to the preservation of the buildings, in general, right? And so what are those angles? How can it be examined further? There's definitely ways to continue on this examination. And lastly, I'd like to thank Candlin for the wonderful presentation and the staff for all of the documentation that has been presented.
Thank you, Commissioner Ponce. Commissioner Hughes.
Yes, I too appreciate us taking the time to have this discussion. And I really want us to consider, the outpour from not even just in Chicago, all over the country to preserve these buildings. And I do believe, and I'm seconding my former commissioners, these buildings are a part of the identity of Chicago. Mies van der Rohe is connected to them. And even beyond that, like our experience of walking down State Street, every corner kind of has its own identity there, which these buildings present that. And then the ornamentation and the detail, and I know you're saying that the stone is, is in it beyond repair right now, but that ornamental kind of detailing that we just don't see anymore with new buildings. It's definitely worth going out on the ledge and preserving. And then I also want to say, I know that the government has its kind of own very strict process that it sticks to, but I think other national organizations like the AIA, the American Institute of Architects, and NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Architects, I think that those groups would absolutely form a task force and help conduct some studies for these properties. I mean, they don't have to respond to a proposal of, the developer having the funds to do the actual work, but just exploring the usage and adaptive reuse of these properties could absolutely be something that these groups are tapped for. And of course, those groups have a lot of reach and access. They mentioned green technology and sustainability in their plea earlier when they spoke. So I know that they would be able to look at it through that lens as well. So I highly encourage the GSA to make this a collaborative process as you guys are exploring every measure to save these buildings.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Are there any other comments, questions? Having none, we've heard a lot of support for this today. But we have heard, and Judge Pallmeyer, really thank you for your time in taking the time to meet with us. And your perspective of this is certainly probably most important in terms of the safety and security of everybody at the Dirksen Courthouse. We recognize that, and we recognize that we're living in a pretty crazy world these days, given everything that has gone on. So, but I think that as we look at the character of Chicago, and the history and where we have all been through, and where the future of the city as well, particularly State Street, which has really been so important to the forming Chicago. I think it's important that we continue to take a longer look at this. I'd like to call for a resolution by this commission to better understand the architectural and historical significance of the Century Building at 202 South State and the Consumers Building at 220 South State. So I'd like to call for a resolution to hereby direct the commission staff to prepare a preliminary summary of information report for each of the structures and present their findings to the commission. So if I could get a motion, I'd like to request a motion to do that.
So moved. Ms. Burns.
Is there a second?
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is this leading to? Like, are we able to kick this into a preliminary recommendation for designation?
I think that the findings, this resolution would lead, could lead to that.
And is that in alignment with, I think Ms. Palmer outlined that the summer is what they're using to conduct their studies? If we have another meeting for more discussion without a preliminary designation, that kicks us out 3 more months, right?
Deanna, could you chime in on this?
Hello, Commissioner. I just want to confirm, Commissioner Hughes, are you asking what timeline we would need in order to bring a report to you?
No, ma'am. I'm asking. Typically, it takes 3 months for designation of a landmark, right?
It would actually, it would take a bit longer than that. Usually you would have the first step when you hear the report and a staff recommendation. And if you move forward, you vote at that point. Then the following month is a report by the Department of Planning and Development Commissioner. And if that report is accepted, then a request in writing is made to the owner requesting consent for the landmark designation. And then there is a timeline in the ordinance for how long they can take to respond. And then after that, if there is consent, then we would move to final landmark recommendation at a subsequent commission meeting. And then it would need to be forwarded to City Council.
Okay.
But once
Yeah,
you start, once you start the preliminary recommendation, it is a formal process, obviously, that has protections in place from the perspective of a typical landmark process for a typical landmark property.
Thank you. I think in my mind, when I said the 3 months, 3 to 4 months, I was thinking about properties that, have no issues along the way. But okay, I seconded Commissioner Burns' motion.
With that, I'd like to do the roll call. Commissioner Jekowitz?
Yes.
Commissioner Ponce?
Yes.
I am also a yes. The motion carries. We are asking for the commission staff to prepare a report to move this forward. And I want to thank everybody for their time and efforts and their perspectives of this very important issue in Chicago's downtown. So, and truly, the time that you all spent and hopefully in the future, we'll all be able to continue to have these discussions and move forward with something that's going to be agreeable to everybody. So with that, that motion carries. I'd like to move forward with the Permit Review Committee reports. This is a report reviewed at the May 5th and June 9th Permit Review Committee meetings. Commissioner Jekowitz.
Thank you, Chairman. The Permit Review Committee reviewed and conditionally approved one project at its May 5th meeting. At its June 9th meeting, the Permit Review Committee reviewed 7 projects. All 7 projects were approved with conditions, and the report summarizing the scope of the proposed projects and the committee's decisions was included in your packets. This report is for your information and for the record.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Emily, you have a report?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner.
Sorry,
So-
Chairman. I need a second to switch the recording for PRC.
PRC is not starting yet.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Emily.
For the month of May, staff reviewed 193 permit applications, 2 of which relate to projects reviewed by the Permit Review Committee. A total of 214 reviews were performed by staff, and the average number of days to issue approval or corrections was 3.6 days. For the month of June, staff reviewed 165 permit applications. A total of 165 reviews were performed in total, and the average number of days to issue approval or corrections was 3.2 days.
Holy cow. That's a lot. Thank you very much for all of your help. Are there any questions to the commission for Emily? If not, Alderman Keppelman, you've been on for a while.
Yes, I'm here for the Immaculata project, 640
Oh,
West.
for the permit review. Okay. We'll get this going because we're about to adjourn this, and Commissioner Jekowitz can, thank you. So with that, I'd like to request a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, nobody disapproves. This meeting is adjourned. Commissioner Jekowitz, the floor is yours in regard to your time.
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break. Let's get back at 3:32.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.